Hello, today I'll be talking about preterm labor and preterm birth. So, what are the definitions? Starting with preterm birth is birth that occurs less than 37 weeks of gestation, and as per the CDC, you can divide the preterm birth as early or late. Early preterm birth is anything that occurs before 34 weeks of gestation, and late preterm is between 34 to less than 37. So, if it's less than 37, we'll say that is 36 plus 6 weeks of gestation. Now, preterm labor is different from preterm birth. Preterm labor has a certain criteria to be met. That is, there should be regular painful uterine contractions at less than 37 weeks of gestation, with cervix that should be dilated more than 3 centimeters, or the cervical length has to be less than 2 centimeter, or this if the cervical length is between 2 to 3 centimeter, there should be a positive fetal fibronectin. So this is saying that whenever the uterine contractions happen, when labor happens, the cervix automatically undergoes two processes. One is cervical dilatation and cervical effacement, that is shortening of the cervix. Now, what is fetal fibronectin? So, fetal fibronectin is an extracellular matrix protein which is found between the maternal decidua and the chorion. So, what it does is it helps in adhering the placenta to the uterus. So, normally this fetal fibronectin should not be found, or it's found in very low concentration in the cervicovaginal secretions because it's tightly placed between the decidua and the chorion. But if there is any mechanical or any inflammatory damage to the membranes, that can result in leakage of this fetal fibronectin into the cervicovaginal fluid. So essentially, the presence of this fetal fibronectin within the cervicovaginal fluid can show that there has been some damage to the membranes and there is a risk of a preterm birth occurring. Now, as I mentioned before, there is a difference between preterm birth and preterm labor. Preterm labor is a cause of preterm birth. Preterm birth can also occur in cases of cervical insufficiency where the cervical length is short and it will lead to birth without the presence of contractions. So that can also lead to preterm birth because of cervical insufficiency, where preterm labor does not happen. So that is also a cause of preterm birth. Now, what is the pathogenesis and the mechanism for preterm labor? So the first is a premature activation of fetal hypothalamo pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, because of excess stress. So what happens normally is that towards term the fetus HPA axis becomes activated. That causes adrenal activation and release of cortisol. This cortisol then activates, it's actually a feedback positive increase of CRH release from the placenta. So this is a positive feedback mechanism. Increased CRH from the placenta will then further cause uterine contractions. Now, when factors like uteroplacental vascular insufficiency, either due to preeclampsia or use of cocaine, etc., the fetus gets less blood supply and that leads to fetal stress. Whenever there's fetal stress, this HPA axis, which should normally get activated only towards term, undergoes premature activation. The premature activation leads to increased fetal adrenal cortisol release. The cortisol, as I mentioned, will cause a feedback increase in the CRH from placenta. That's corticotropin releasing hormone from the placenta. That CRH from the placenta will lead to increased release of prostaglandin from the amniochorion, and also a further release of fetal cortisol because CRH causes increased release of cortisol. So what these prostaglandins will do is it will increase uterine contractions, and this release of fetal cortisol will further activate this cycle, leading to a vicious cycle. And another thing is the fetal adrenal gland, as we already know, produces DHE and DHEA sulfate, and these two substances will enter into the placental cells where they get converted into estriol, and this estriol then acts at the estrogen receptors, which will lead to further uterine contractions. So this is one mechanism of preterm labor. The second is infection and inflammation. So, whenever there is a bacterial infection, the bacteria release substances like phospholipase A2. Phospholipase A2 then further on acts on arachidonic acid, which later leads to formation of prostaglandins, and prostaglandins lead to uterine contractions. Also, bacteria, they release substances like enzymes like proteases and collagenases, which can break down extracellular matrix and weaken the amniotic membranes, and that can essentially to pre-labor premature rupture of membrane, and this rupture of membrane can facilitate further uterine contractions and labor. Next factor is decidual hemorrhage. So whenever there is hemorrhage, like for example abruption, there is a release of tissue factor, because there is tissue damage with the hemorrhage, that releases tissue factor. Tissue factor activates a coagulation cascade. The final pathway in the coagulation cascade leads to activation of thrombin, and thrombin, through various mechanisms, will lead to myometrial contractions, release of proteases like matrix metalloproteases, which will increase uterine contractility, leading to labor. Also, the inflammation that is created with the hemorrhage can irritate the amniotic membranes and lead to PPROM. Finally, pathologic uterine distension, excessive distension of the uterus either due to multifetal gestation or polyhydramnios, will put pressure on the amniotic membranes and lead to rupture of membranes, which can further induce uterine contractions and induce preterm labor. Alright. So, a few risk factors for preterm birth. Note, these are risk factors for preterm birth, not preterm labor. So, the first very important risk factor is a prior preterm birth, and at the end of the video I will be talking about certain measures that we can take to prevent preterm birth in a woman with prior preterm birth. Then prior cervical surgery, either because of cervical carcinoma, procedures like cervical conization or LEEP can be done, which can, it's essentially removing a part of the cervical tissue, which can lead to cervical insufficiency, and that in turn can lead to preterm birth. Various fetal anomalies, then fetal growth restriction, and any cause that will lead to increased fetal stress. Then maternal smoking and drug abuse like cocaine and amphetamines, these also will cause placental vessel constriction and decreased uteroplacental blood supply. Then maternal comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, again these can cause vasculopathies, which reduce blood supply to the fetus, and it can lead to fetal stress and activation of HPA axis. Diabetes, gestational diabetes, is associated with polyhydramnios, and that can result in distension of the uterus. Vaginal bleeding, various infections, multiple gestation causing a distended uterus, similarly polyhydramnios causing distended uterus. Oligohydramnios also, one method is that the oligohydramnios can be a result of the uteroplacental insufficiency. Oligohydramnios can also result in placental abruption, so these can lead to preterm birth. Also, factors like poor nutrition, poor maternal nutrition, a low BMI, a very short interpregnancy interval, all of these are risk factors for preterm birth. Now, next is, how do you evaluate suspected preterm labor? So here what happens is, a woman is coming with regular uterine contractions and you want to confirm that it is a preterm labor. So if you have suspicion, that is, the woman has regular contractions but there is no rupture of membranes, the fetal status is all reassuring, and you want, this is a suspected preterm labor, so you check the gestational age. If the gestational age is less than 34 weeks, and that at that point you have to look at the cervical dilatation. If the cervix is dilated more than 3 centimeters, then you can confirm that it's preterm labor. And if the cervix is less than 3 centimeter dilated, then your next step is going to be a transvaginal ultrasound measurement of the cervical length. If the cervical length is less than 2 centimeters, means the cervix is effaced, and then it's likely that it's preterm labor. If it is more than 3 centimeter, that's a good enough length of the cervix to say that it's not proper preterm labor. So preterm labor is unlikely if the cervix is more than 3 centimeters in length. But if it is somewhere in between, like 2 to 3 centimeters, then we will check fetal fibronectin. And as I've already mentioned, if you find fetal fibronectin in the cervicovaginal secretion, that strongly suggests a risk of preterm birth. So if the fetal fibronectin is positive, then you can confirm that it's preterm labor. But if it's negative, then it's quite unlikely that it's preterm labor. Now, all of this is for people who are less than 34 weeks coming with regular uterine contractions. What if it's more than 34 weeks with regular uterine contractions? At this time, you just do expectant management because that's moving on towards late preterm, so you just do expectant management. You may or may not give corticosteroids. Usually, according to ACOG, you could consider giving a dose of corticosteroids. Then, if the GBS screening result is not known, then we generally give intrapartum penicillin G or GBS prophylaxis for mothers who are in preterm labor. We don't usually give tocolysis if the gestation is more than 34 weeks. Now, suppose you have confirmed that it's preterm labor, how will you manage it? So, if it is more than 34 weeks, as I've already mentioned, you can consider giving a single dose of steroids. You generally don't do tocolysis, you don't give magnesium sulfate, it's basically just expectant delivery. But if it is less than 34 weeks, first thing you have to give antepartum steroids, that is betamethasone. And this is when you're expecting the delivery in the next 7 days, you'll give 1 dose of antenatal steroids. Suppose the previous dose of steroids was given more than 14 days prior, then also you can repeat 1 dose. Now, the reason we give betamethasone, that is antepartum steroids, is basically or antenatal steroids, is basically to reduce the risk for neonatal respiratory distress syndrome. The antenatal corticosteroids are given 7 days prior to delivery such that its maximum efficiency is reached at the time of delivery. And as I've mentioned, all pregnancies less than 34 weeks have to be given steroids, but if you're considering pregnancies more than 34 weeks, the benefit of an antenatal corticosteroid is less clear. And according to ACOG, you could give a dose of antenatal steroid except in cases of chorioamnionitis, where delivery is bound to happen, you don't give steroids. And if they've already received a course of steroids, then also you don't generally give steroids. These are cases when the gestation is more than 34 weeks. Now coming back, so for less than 34 weeks, after you give steroids, you can give drugs for tocolysis. So if it is less than 32 weeks, we will give NSAID like indomethacin because it prevents the production of prostaglandin, and prostaglandins are the ones that cause uterine contractions. But if the gestation is more than 32 weeks, then we prefer to give calcium channel blockers like nifedipine or terbutaline. We don't usually give indomethacin because indomethacin will increase the risk of closure of a ductus arteriosus. So that's why we don't give it after 34 weeks. And after 32 weeks. And tocolysis has to be given maximum for 48 hours, and that's mainly so that you're giving time for the steroids to act and help in fetal lung maturity. Now, the third thing that we perform is for neuroprotection, that is, we give magnesium sulfate for gestations less than 32 weeks, mainly for neuroprotection and to reduce the risk of cerebral palsy. We don't usually give this after 32 weeks. Now remember, for all preterm labor where you do not know the GBS screening result, we routinely give GBS prophylaxis with intrapartum penicillin or ampicillin or cefazolin. Alright. Now, coming to a few aspects of prevention of preterm labor or preterm birth. So the first is with progesterone supplementation. In women with a history of a previous spontaneous preterm birth, we can give progesterone supplementation because progesterone maintains uterine quiescence and prevents uterine contractions. So that's one option. The second option is, I already mentioned that preterm birth can happen because of cervical insufficiency. That can be managed by placing a cervical cerclage. So cervical cerclage is usually performed at 12 to 14 weeks, so that once you put the cerclage at 12 to 14 weeks, you can prevent um, preterm birth happening at this in the second trimester. So who all are the people who all can you give cervical cerclage? So the first is women with more than equal to 2 previous spontaneous second trimester losses. In these cases, you'll give cervical cerclage and progesterone supplementation. And any women with a single prior preterm birth along with a cervical length that is less than 2.5 centimeter in the second trimester screening of the present pregnancy, you can give cervical cerclage and progesterone supplementation. And as I've already mentioned, a very short interpregnancy interval increases the risk for preterm birth, so you have to make sure that the interval is at least 18 months. Alright, so that is about preterm birth and preterm labor. So next topic is PPROM, that's preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes. So this is rupture of membranes that happens before term and before the onset of labor. So the pathogenesis of PPROM, the first is increased uterine distension because of polyhydramnios or multifetal gestation that stretches the uterus and the membranes and therefore increasing the risk of rupture. Second is ascending infection either because of bacterial vaginosis or asymptomatic bacteriuria. So bacterial enzymes are the ones that play the major role. They increase the release of prostaglandins, which can increase contractions, and this can result in increased risk of preterm labor. And this prostaglandin releases because of increased release of phospholipase A2, which increases prostaglandin production. Then bacteria also release enzymes like collagenases, which can break down collagen and reduce the strength of the membrane, therefore result in rupture of membranes. So that's how the infections can cause both PPROM and preterm labor. Then the third is antepartum hemorrhage, and as we discussed earlier in the preterm labor section, the blood can actually cause inflammation of the amniotic membrane, and that inflammation can lead to weakening and risk of rupture of membranes. So because infection, as I've mentioned, plays an important role in rupture of membranes, it's important that you do an antenatal urine culture. For every initial antenatal visit, we will do a urine culture, and if there is bacteriuria, even if it's asymptomatic bacteriuria, you'll have to treat. And it's not just, it doesn't end there, you have to do a repeat urine culture after treatment to make sure that it's cured, because infection can increase the risk of uh, intraamniotic infections like endometritis and chorioamnionitis, and that has a risk of rupture of membranes and preterm labor. So what are the risk factors of preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes? So most of them are similar to the risk factors that we saw for preterm birth. A previous PPROM is an important risk factor, and as we had already mentioned, genital tract infection, antepartum hemorrhage, and even smoking, because all the various substances in smoke can actually cause inflammation and weakening of the um, amniotic membranes, therefore increasing the risk of rupture. Then, so what are the clinical features of rupture of membrane? So the first is a gush of clear fluid. Now note, it need not always be a gush of clear fluid. It can also be a slow leakage of fluid that should raise suspicion of a rupture. Whenever you suspect rupture, you should not perform a digital cervical examination, because there is a risk of introducing infection, and so you should just do a sterile speculum examination, because when you do sterile speculum examination, you don't really insert the speculum into the cervix, it just stays at the vagina. Then there are a few tests that you'll do to check if it's amniotic fluid. So the first is a pooling of clear fluid in the posterior vagina. In fact, that is the gold standard for diagnosing a rupture of membrane, the pooling of fluid in the posterior vagina. And if that cannot be seen, you can also ask the woman to bear down and perform a Valsalva maneuver that will increase the leakage of the clear fluid into the vagina. Apart from that, there is the formation of a ferning pattern on the slide, can also be seen with amniotic fluid. And finally, a positive nitrazine test. So nitrazine, it's actually nitrazine paper that detects pH. Usually it detects pH in the range of more than 4.5, so basically more of an alkaline range. An amniotic fluid is alkaline and it has a pH of around 7 to 7.3, whereas a normal vaginal pH is only 3.8 to 4.2. So normal vaginal pH is going to be 3.8 to 4.2. The amniotic fluid vaginal pH is going to be around 7 to 7.3, and this nitrazine test detects pH that is more than 4.5. So if it's positive, it most likely is amniotic fluid. All right. Coming to complications of PPROM, so one is, as you've already mentioned, preterm labor. Then there is a risk for intraamniotic infection because of the direct because there is exposure to the outside environment through the cervix, so that can lead to chorioamnionitis, endometritis, and sepsis. Then there is risk for umbilical cord prolapse. There is a risk for placental abruption because there is sudden gush of fluid. There is a decompression of happening within the uterus, so that the placenta can shear away from the uterine wall. And there is a risk of oligohydramnios, obviously, because there's loss of fluid. Coming to the management of PPROM, so in all cases of rupture of membranes, you have to check for any infection, intraamniotic infection. Whenever there is an intraamniotic infection, there can be a maternal fever, tachycardia, uterine tenderness, then leukocytosis, maternal leukocytosis. There can be yellowish purulent discharge from the vagina. All of this would point out to an intraamniotic infection. Always check for fetal surveillance through the non-stress test. And if the GBS, you have to do GBS screening and prophylaxis. In case GBS screening results are not known, then you, for all cases of PPROM with unknown GBS screening status, you have to give prophylaxis with either intrapartum penicillin or ampicillin or cefazolin. Now, coming to the management depends on the gestational age. Automatically, if the gestational age is more than 37 weeks, just directly deliver. But if it is less than 34 weeks, then we will go for expectant management, because the fetus is not mature enough to survive outside the uterus. So expectant management includes bed rest, prophylactic antibiotics. Now, PPROM is a risk factor for ascending infection and chorioamnionitis. So you have to give antibiotics to reduce the risk of maternal and fetal infection. So when you're reducing the risk for infection, you're actually delaying the onset of labor. So that is why these antibiotics are called latency antibiotics, because they help prevent labor and keep the latent period longer. So the antibiotics that we give are azithromycin oral with IV ampicillin for 48 hours, followed by amoxicillin 3 times a day for a total of 5 days. Then we will give antenatal steroids for fetal lung maturity. Tocolysis is given for 48 hours, but it should be only given for 48 hours. Now note that tocolysis is contraindicated if the woman is in advanced labor. Advanced labor means the cervix is dilated more than 4 centimeter, or if there is chorioamnionitis, or if the fetal status is non-reassuring, there is abruptio placentae, or if there is any cord prolapse. In all of these cases, an immediate delivery is warranted. So in those cases, you should not give tocolysis. Otherwise, tocolysis is given for 48 hours. And if the gestation is less than 32 weeks, we'll give magnesium sulfate for fetal neuroprotection. Now this is for less than 34 weeks. Suppose it is between 34 to 37 weeks, you have an option of either an expectant management or delivery, although we do prefer to deliver, and 1 dose of antenatal steroids can also be given. Now, whenever there is a rupture of membranes, there are 3 conditions where immediate delivery has to be done. The first is if there is intraamniotic infection like chorioamnionitis, or if there's abruptio placentae, or if there is cord prolapse. You have no place for expectant management and delivery has to be done. You can give corticosteroids, and if it is a chorioamnionitis, we will have to treat the So the infection has to be treated with ampicillin plus gentamicin, and if it's, as I mentioned, less than 32 weeks gestation, magnesium sulfate has to be given as neuroprotection. Alright, so that's management of PPROM. And one more mention here is that suppose there is PPROM but there's meconium staining of the amniotic fluid, immediately check for signs of chorioamnionitis. If there is no chorioamnionitis, you don't have to do any additional interventions. The management can be continued as the same. But if there is chorioamnionitis, as I mentioned, delivery immediately is required. So that's about with PPROM. So we covered preterm labor, preterm birth, and PPROM and their management. Thank you.